I'm Brian Hall, AMC's Global Product Leader for Strategy Optimization. Today I'd like to talk with you about how we can actually, as an industry, develop mine plans that really deliver what stakeholders actually want. We're going to look very briefly to say, what do stakeholders really want? Can mining companies generate plans that are going to deliver what they want? And the answer is yes, we can. Then perhaps more importantly, how do we actually identify companies that are working plans that deliver what stakeholders want? And how do we reward companies in the marketplace for doing that? Well, what do stakeholders want? Very briefly, shareholders want dividends and capital growth. That's how they get their returns. Governments are going to want taxes and royalties. They want economic activity and employment in the district. The employees themselves want good wages and conditions. They want security of employment. They'd like to have a job for life, perhaps. And suppliers and the local communities also are going to be wanting to have the infrastructure and the income that comes from the economic activity in that region. And all of these prefer to have it for longer rather than shorter periods of time. So there are two key issues. The first one is, how do we identify the plan that generates the biggest pie to share around? And then how do we share the pie between the stakeholders? Can mining companies create plans that deliver the goals? Yes, we can, and a good strategy optimization study is going to assist us with both of those. So first, how can we identify the plan that is going to maximize the size of the pie that we want to distribute? Now, as an industry, we focus a lot on improvements in productivity, efficiency, unit costs, and so on, and that's all good and right and proper, and we should. That's doing things right. The more important thing, though, that we often forget is, are we doing the right thing? Of course, ultimately, we should be doing the right things right. But in terms of making sure that we've got the best plans in place to deliver what stakeholders want, the first thing to focus on really is, are we doing the right things? Have we got the right plan? There are three types of parameters: the things we've got, the things we can do something about, and the things that then follow on from the strategic decisions that we make. So what really drives value? Well, the resource in the ground is very important, obviously. It's a given, we can't do anything about it. And we're working within some infrastructure and green and political and social and economic and all sorts of environments that we work in. We can make big picture decisions about the size of mining methods, mining and treatment rates, the sequence in which we mine various parts of our deposits. We can't change the resource itself, but we can change what we know about the resource and therefore have an impact on how effective our planning might be. Those things flow into all the things we get very excited about, our schedules of production, physicals, and then the cash flows, revenues and costs that are associated with it. And the value flows out of that. But the things there in that bottom left-hand box that we tend to focus on a lot really are only filtering the big picture decisions that we've made regarding the things up in the top right-hand box. But yes, we should be looking to improve efficiencies in our operations, but if we're not going in the right direction in the first place, the impact may not be all that great. So we really want to know what mix of decisions that we can make about the things up in the top right box are going to maximize the value flowing out of the detailed operating plans. If we look at, say, a strategic decision measure like cut-off grade, increasing from left to right across this chart and value increasing up the left-hand vertical axis, over to the left, cut off too low, bringing material into the reserve that is destroying value. Up here we are leaving out material that could add value, the cutoff is too high. And so there is an optimum cutoff sitting at some point like that. Production rate, same sort of thing. Here we're not using the capacity we've got. We bump up against some restriction, we need to do some debottlenecking. Maybe we go a little bit further, we've got to do a lot of debottlenecking to provide the next increment of production capability. And then we have to use that to actually get the benefit from it. So again, somewhere there's going to be an optimum production rate that's going to be generally just before we have to go and spend some capital to debottleneck. Let's put these together in a three-dimensional chart, cut-off increasing across to the right, production rate increasing as we go back to the back, value increasing vertically, and we find very often that an operation that hasn't been optimized before starts off somewhere like that. The standard procedure then is to say, let's increase the production rate and spread the costs, the fixed costs, across more tonnage to reduce the unit cost and increase the margin. But that actually doesn't necessarily get us anywhere. We want to go in a totally different direction, but we'll never know where that point is if we don't actually evaluate that surface or have some sort of modelling structure that will allow us to move around and find that point. If we've been able to find it for one value measure, we can find the peak of hills for different value measures or valleys of other measures of things we want to minimise, and work out what delivers a good satisfaction of all the various goals that the company and other stakeholders may have. So here's a real-life case study, cut-off grades across the bottom for an underground gold mine, several cash flow measures, NPV at 0, in other words, undiscounted cash, and NPV at 5 and 10%, the average production of ounces per year, the orange line, and the green line, the unit costs, dollars per ounce. Different parameters come in and have effects on different decisions. The discount rate, for instance, may well have a significant influence if we're interested in the buying or the selling price of this particular operation. But very often for the actual operating strategies, it doesn't have much impact at all. So if we have a look at operating strategies, we can see that for maximising cash measures, NPV, undiscounted cash flow, cut-offs in the 4 to 4.5 gram per tonne region are going to give us a pretty good satisfaction of all of those cash flow measures. To maximise our output or minimise the unit cost, we actually need higher cut-offs, up around 5. But even back at the 4 to 4.5, we're not too far away from the output and unit cost goals either. If, on the other hand, we're looking to maximise the tonnage or the mine life, then we want a pretty low cut-off. The strategy sends us over there to maximise the reserves or the mine life, and we lose significantly then on the cash measures and the unit cost and production measures. Now, new resources and hence reserves are good if they come from new exploration discoveries, but simply increasing the reserve in a given resource generally is not actually correlated with value additions. Let's have a look at our curves again. As the cut-off increases from left to right, then we are reducing the tonnes and the contained ounces in this gold operation. So starting at the right-hand side and moving back, we increase tonnes and ounces as we go that way, and out in that region we actually also increase the cash and the NPV and the output. Then we hit the peaks of the cash flow curves, and then we find that increasing tonnes and ounces in the reserve even more is actually correlated now with a decrease in the cash and NPV and output. And virtually every mine that I've ever come across is working in that region there. Increasing tonnes, increasing reserves is negatively correlated with value generation. Now, there are similar sorts of outcomes with an open pit. In an open pit, we'll often find that in terms of the cut-off optimisation, it typically sits around the optimum because there's this ridge of value that runs up through the cut-off versus mining rate space for a given treatment rate. What we find then is that for any particular mining rate, we will actually send the best material to the mill and the cut-off will automatically optimise. If we were to mine faster, then we can send higher grade material to the mill and we actually generate more value up to a point. The higher grade that we get actually more than pays for the faster mining rate. In this particular case study, the client actually decided to go the other way, down towards the lower left corner, because that was going to be a slower mining rate that was going to save costs. We actually saved or reduced the revenue more than the costs. Underground access development to open up new areas is exactly analogous. Do we have to do that decline this year to get to the new mining areas? No, we don't. But if we don't, then we're not going to have the higher grade resource to actually make money. When should we do these sorts of optimization studies? Not every year. There's too much work involved to do it all the time, but you should be reviewing it every few years. Certainly you need to review it as part of your annual planning cycle to make sure you're on the right track, but not every year. We believe it's an integral and essential part of the pre-feasibility study when you're trying to actually find what is the very best case to take forward into your feasibility study planning. There's a lot of work goes on, the green curve increasing, engineering effort, a lot of engineering effort going in during the feasibility and detailed design and construction phases. But once you've made the decisions that have gone into the final feasibility study, your ability to influence value shown by the orange curve is virtually gone. Got to get it right before you get into the final detailed planning. It's very easy if you're just looking at one cutoff or any other strategy measure. Obviously, strategy A is the way to go. And we might find if we evaluated the curves that, we're not too far off. But strategy B, we didn't know, had all of this additional upside, and so we forego that value because we saved pennies by not doing that full investigation up front. Maybe we can actually find some optimum policies. We can get some specialists' optimization software going, and it tells us what the strategy should be. And often we'll have a look at a base case price forecast and an optimistic forecast. But it's difficult to know what's going on. Which option should we select for? The temptation is to go for the green square because there's that extra value available there if the price goes up. But is that really where we want to be? Let's put the curves in and see. There we see curves going through those optimum points. What we find is that if we were to set up for scenario A, that lower price, then we get the bulk of the value anyway if the price goes up. So the real benefit of setting up for that higher price is actually that little small green area there at the top of that line. But if we set up for that and then the lower price comes in, we're actually a lot worse off than we could have been. Now here's some nickel prices from quite a few years ago now, and yet strangely current. Some big rises, some big falls, and then some predictions. The fine lines are the analysts' consensus predictions at the point where they leave the dark line, which is the actuals. For a lot of the period, the right-hand side of this chart, mines were being designed with forecasts that were significantly optimistic. So let's come back to our line now and say that the green is the predicted price and the brown is the actual that is achieved. We find that typically companies are not setting up with optimum cutoffs. They're setting up at significantly lower break-even cutoffs for the higher prices. The low price comes in, they end up somewhere way down there and wonder why we don't make money. We could be establishing the plan that sets us up here where there is a high average return and not much volatility, instead of which everything pushing towards higher reserves, reducing costs and so on with break-even cutoffs is pushing us down here, lower average returns, high volatility, great risk when the price goes down. And that's why so many companies right now are in this sort of situation here. They allowed themselves to work with cutoffs that were way too low, and then when the low prices come in, they're in dire straits. That was a hypothetical, but here's a real-life case study from a gold open pit. On the axes of these hills of value, we've got the treatment rate across the front axis and the mining rate across the back axis, with the NPV of 100 being 100 units of NPV, where it was when we started working with this particular client. At this gold price, we could have got a significant improvement in value, moving to maximum mining and treatment rates for what were believed to be realistic, reasonable maximum rates. That's okay for the base case gold price, but if we were to look at a significantly lower gold price, we find here now that the base case strategy is actually negative NPV. The back right-hand corner for the optimum case with the base case gold price is barely positive. The best position here on this little island of brown positive NPV in the midst of a sea of negative territory is over there where we have increased the mining rate but not increased the milling rate. So what we see here is that when the gold price is lower, the increase in the milling rate, capital for that, is not paid off. If we come back over to the other side then and have a look to see where the safe strategy is with the low gold price, we find that we lose a little bit of value, but it's still significantly better value than the original base case.
In this particular case, where do you want to be? Well, the safe position is probably there where that little red square is, rather than way back in the back right-hand corner, the optimum for the base case gold price. We've had a look at a number of ways that we can identify the plan that is going to maximise the size of the pie. How very quickly can we have a look at the sharing of that pie between the stakeholders? Let's have a look at some hills for two different stakeholders, the company on the right, the government on the left. The government obviously wants to have the strategy there, the company obviously wants to be there. Neither is going to be very well off at the other's strategy. But there is a strategy in the middle that may be mutually acceptable and everybody gets some benefit from. Nobody gets the maximum that they could have got, but everybody's getting something. Another way of looking at it is to say, what if one particular value measure has to lie within some certain range? So let's say we want to maximise the value measure A, subject to the value measure of B not being less than some certain value. So knowing the shapes of the curves now, we're in a position to say the acceptable strategies are going to be within this range where B is greater than its minimum value, and that then says that the maximum we can get from A is not quite up to the maximum in this case, the way the curves have been drawn, but it's within the constraints of what we can do for measure B. And so that could be an internal company measure, it could be some sort of external goal, it could be some sort of environmental measure. Anything that we can measure, we can take into account. We saw before, we've emphasised a lot the productivity, efficiency and so on, that's doing things right, but we're missing the big picture. Are we doing the right things? We can do the right things. The real problem is that very often we are actually rewarding the wrong thing. The measures that people use, looking at unit costs, looking at productivity, the focus on that, reserves and mine life in years gone by, and no doubt we'll come around the cycle and we'll focus on them again sometime in the future. They are all measures that are actually not related to maximising value. They're short-term productivity and efficiency measures or mine life measures that don't tell us whether we're actually working the plan that delivers value. The real problem then is that if we focus on them and if we reward improvements in them, then we actually drive counterproductive management decisions, like the open pit managers in the earlier slide who decided to reduce production to save costs but actually reduced revenue by more. The challenge is how to determine that mines have identified the best plan and are implementing it, and then the next challenge is how to reward them in the marketplace.
Well, there we have it. Only time to talk very briefly about it now, but if you want more details, you can find them in my book, or of course you can contact us at any of AMC's offices. You have a great day now.